You're doing it wrong. Right now, thousands of gardeners are planting tomatoes the way their grandparents did, wondering why they're getting golf ball-sized fruits while their neighbor pulls off tomatoes the size of softballs. The difference isn't luck. It's not magic fertilizer. And it's definitely not some secret heirloom variety. It's one simple thing you're not doing at planting time. Stick around. Because once you know this, you'll never plant tomatoes the same way again. Let's start with what most people do. They buy a tomato seedling from the nursery, dig a hole about as deep as the pot it came in, plop it in the ground, water it, and call it a day. Maybe they add some compost. Maybe they throw in a handful of fertilizer. And then they wait. 6 weeks later, they're disappointed. The plant is growing, sure, but it's spindly. The tomatoes are small. The yield is mediocre at best. Here's what they missed. Tomatoes have a superpower that almost no other plant has. And if you don't use it, you're leaving probably 50% of your potential harvest on the table. That superpower is the ability to grow roots from their stem. Any part of a tomato stem that touches soil will sprout roots, not just a few roots. Massive root systems. And more roots means more nutrient uptake, more water absorption, more stability, and way more tomatoes. So here's the secret. When you plant tomatoes, you don't plant them at soil level like every other plant. You bury them deep, really deep. Strip off the lower leaves and bury the stem up to the first set of true leaves, sometimes even higher. That buried stem becomes a root factory. Within a week, you'll have roots sprouting all along that buried section. Within 2 weeks, your tomato plant has doubled or tripled its root system compared to a plant that was just dropped in at pot level. Now I know what you're thinking. Won't burying the stem stunt the plant? Won't it take longer to grow because you're basically cutting its height in half? Short answer is no. Long answer is way more interesting. So let's get into it. When you bury a tomato stem deep, you're triggering something called adventitious root formation. That's the fancy term for roots that grow from non-root tissue. Most plants can't do this, or they do it really poorly. Tomatoes are exceptional at it. Those little bumps you see on tomato stems, those are root primordia, basically baby roots waiting to happen. The second those bumps are in contact with moist soil, they activate. It's like flipping a switch. Here's why this matters so much. Root systems are everything in plant productivity. The bigger the root system, the more water the plant can pull from the soil during hot days. The more nutrients it can access, the more stable the plant is against wind and the weight of heavy fruit. A tomato plant with a small, shallow root system is constantly stressed. It's working at maximum capacity just to keep itself alive. A plant with a massive, deep root system, it's got resources to spare. That extra energy goes into fruit production. Let me give you some numbers. A typical tomato plant planted at pot level might develop roots in the top 12 inches of soil, spreading maybe 18 inches wide. That's not bad, but a deeply buried plant? It'll have roots 18 to 24 inches deep, sometimes deeper, and spreading 24 to 36 inches wide. That's double or triple the soil volume the plant can access. More soil volume means more resources, more abundant fruit. But here's where it gets really interesting. The depth of the roots matters for water availability. Surface roots dry out fast. The top few inches of soil are the first to dry out during hot weather. If your roots are mostly in that zone, your plant is constantly thirsty. Deep roots access water that stays available way longer. Even in a drought, soil 18 inches down retains moisture. Your deeply planted tomatoes can handle dry spells that would devastate shallow-rooted plants. Now let's talk about how to actually do this right. Because there's a technique to it. You can't just dig any old hole and shove the plant in. First, you need to prep your seedling. Look at your tomato plant. It probably has a bunch of leaves along the stem. You're going to remove the lower leaves, leaving only the top few sets. I usually leave the top 3 or 4 sets of true leaves and strip everything else. Those leaves are coming off anyway when you bury the stem, and you don't want rotting leaves underground creating disease problems. Here's how to remove the leaves properly. Don't yank them off. That can damage the stem. Use your fingers to snap them off cleanly at the stem, or use clean scissors. Remove the leaves, not the stems. Leave the little stem nubs. They'll be underground anyway, and they actually help with root formation. Now you need to dig your hole. This is where most people mess up. They dig a shallow hole because they're thinking like they would for any other plant. For deep planting tomatoes, you've got two options. Option 1 is a deep hole. Dig straight down about 10 to 12 inches, maybe wider than the root ball by a couple inches. The plant goes in vertically, nice and deep, well-draining soil. Option 2, and this is my preferred method, is a trench. Dig a trench about 6 inches deep and long enough to lay your tomato stem sideways. You're literally going to lay the plant on its side in the ground with just the top few inches of stem and leaves sticking up above ground. Sounds crazy, right? But here's what happens. The buried stem sprouts roots along its entire length. The tip of the plant, the part above ground, curves upward naturally within a few days. Within a week, it looks like a normal plant, except it's got this massive horizontal root system underground. This method is especially good in heavy clay soil where digging deep holes is brutal. Let me walk you through the trench method step by step because it's the one that confuses people. You've got your seedling with the lower leaves removed. 6 inches deep, running from where you want the base of your plant to where you want the top to be. That trench needs to be long enough to accommodate the entire stem you're burying, so probably 8 to 12 inches long, depending on your seedling size. Lay the plant in the trench, stem horizontal, root ball at one end, top of the plant at the other end. The root ball sits in the soil. The stem lies along the bottom of the trench, the top few inches of the plant, with the remaining leaves, sticks up out of the ground at an angle. Then you fill in the trench, burying the stem completely but leaving that top section exposed. Water it thoroughly. Done. In 2 or 3 days, that top section will straighten up and start growing vertically. You won't even be able to tell it was planted sideways. But underground magic is happening. Roots are sprouting all along that buried stem. Within 2 weeks, you've got a root system that would normally take 6 or 8 weeks to develop. Now, here's something people always ask. Does the type of soil matter for deep planting? Absolutely. Deep planting works best in loose, well-draining soil. If you've got heavy clay that holds water, you need to be more careful. Burying stems too deep in soggy clay can lead to rot. The solution is to amend your soil first. Add compost, peat moss, or other organic matter to improve drainage, which keeps the stem in the top 6 inches where drainage is usually better even in clay soils. Let's talk about what to add to that planting hole, because this is where you can multiply the benefits. You're already giving your plant a head start with deep planting. Now you're going to supercharge it with the right amendments. The goal is to provide slow-release nutrients that'll feed the plant all season long. First, compost. Always compost. A couple handfuls mixed into the soil at the bottom of your hole or trench. Compost provides nutrients, improves soil structure, and feeds beneficial microbes. It's the foundation of good soil. If you're not using compost, you're handicapping yourself from day one. Second, bone meal. This is a slow-release phosphorus source, and phosphorus is critical for root development and fruit production. Tomatoes are heavy phosphorus feeders. A tablespoon or 2 of bone meal mixed into the planting hole gives your plant access to phosphorus over the entire growing season. This is especially important for deeply planted tomatoes, because you're encouraging massive root growth. Those roots need phosphorus. Third, calcium. Tomatoes need calcium to prevent blossom end rot, that black spot that ruins tomatoes from the bottom up. The best way to provide calcium is crushed eggshells or garden lime. I use both. Crushed eggshells decompose slowly and release calcium over time. Lime provides immediately available calcium and also helps adjust soil pH if your soil is too acidic. Tomatoes like slightly acidic to neutral soil, around 6.0 to 7.0 pH. A handful of crushed eggshells and a tablespoon of lime per plant does wonders. Fourth, Epsom salt. This one is controversial in gardening circles, but I'm a believer. Epsom salt provides magnesium, which tomatoes use in chlorophyll production and nutrient uptake. A tablespoon of Epsom salt mixed into the planting hole, and then another tablespoon sprinkled around the plant base a month later, seems to improve overall plant health and fruit production. Some people swear by it. Some think it's unnecessary. Try it yourself and see. Here's what I put in every tomato planting hole. 2 handfuls of compost, 2 tablespoons of bone meal, a small handful of crushed eggshells, a tablespoon of garden lime, and a tablespoon of Epsom salt. Mix it all into the soil at the bottom of the hole or trench. Then plant your deeply buried tomato right into that nutrient mix. The roots grow directly into that enhanced soil and have access to everything they need from day one. Now let's talk about watering after planting, because this is where people mess up even if they did everything else right. After you plant deeply, you need to water thoroughly, not a light sprinkle, a deep soaking. You want water penetrating down to where those new roots are going to grow. This serves two purposes. It settles the soil around the buried stem, eliminating air pockets that could dry out the stem, and it provides the moisture needed to trigger root formation. For the first week after planting, keep the soil consistently moist. Not soggy, but moist. Check it daily. If the top inch of soil is dry, water again. After that first week, once roots are established, you can back off to less frequent but deeper watering. Tomatoes do better with deep, infrequent watering than shallow, frequent watering. Deep watering encourages deep root growth. Shallow watering keeps roots near the surface where they're vulnerable. Here's something most people don't know. Deeply planted tomatoes need less frequent watering throughout the season compared to shallow planted ones. Those deep roots can access moisture that surface roots can't reach. In the middle of summer, when you're watering shallow planted tomatoes every day or every other day, your deep planted tomatoes might only need water twice a week. That's a huge time saver, and it's better for the plant. Constant wet-dry cycles stress plants. Consistent deep moisture keeps them happy. Let's address some common concerns about deep planting. People worry that burying the stem will lead to rot or fungal issues. This can happen if you plant in soil that doesn't drain well, or if you overwater. The solution is good soil drainage and proper watering. If your soil drains well and you're not keeping it waterlogged, disease isn't a problem. In fact, deeply planted tomatoes are often healthier because they're less stressed overall. Second, timing. People worry that deep planting will delay harvest because the plant loses height. Here's the reality. You might see fruit a few days later, maybe a week at most, compared to a shallow planted tomato. But once production starts, the deeply planted tomato produces way more fruit for way longer. You more than make up for any slight delay with increased yield. I'll take a few extra days for double the tomatoes any day. Third, plant size. Some people think you need a big, tall seedling to plant deeply. Not true. Even small seedlings benefit from deep planting. If your seedling is only 6 inches tall, plant it so 3 or 4 inches are underground. If it's 12 inches tall, bury 8 or 9 inches. The principle is the same, regardless of plant size. More buried stem equals more roots. Now let's talk about what happens after you plant. You're going to see your deeply planted tomatoes outperform shallow planted ones in several ways. First, they'll be stockier, more compact, stronger stems, less legginess. This is because the energy that would have gone into growing a tall, weak stem is instead going into root development and overall plant health. Second, they'll handle stress better. Hot days, dry spells, windy weather, none of it phases them as much. Their root systems give them stability and access to resources. You'll see shallow planted tomatoes wilting in the afternoon heat, while your deep planted ones stay perky. Third, when fruit production starts, you'll notice a difference in fruit size and abundance. More nutrients and water mean the plant can support bigger fruits and more of them. It's not unusual to see 20 or 30% more fruit from a deeply planted tomato compared to a shallow one, all else being equal. Here's something else you can do to maximize the benefits of deep planting. Mulch heavily around your plants. A 3 to 4 inch layer of organic mulch, like straw or shredded leaves, keeps the soil cooler, retains moisture, and suppresses weeds. This is especially important for deeply planted tomatoes, because you want that root zone to stay consistently moist and cool. Mulch helps tremendously. Let's talk about determinate versus indeterminate varieties, because deep planting works slightly differently for each. Determinate tomatoes, the ones that grow to a certain height and then stop, benefit from deep planting, but maybe not as dramatically as indeterminate varieties. They're genetically programmed to be more compact. Deep planting still gives them better roots and more resources, but the yield increase might be 15 or 20% instead of 30 or 40%. Indeterminate tomatoes, the ones that keep growing all season like vines, these are where deep planting really shines. They need massive root systems to support all that growth and fruit production. Deep planting an indeterminate variety is like giving it rocket fuel. The plant can grow bigger, produce more, and do it all season long without running out of steam. Here's a pro tip. If you're planting multiple tomato plants, space them farther apart than you think you need to. Deeply planted tomatoes develop huge root systems that compete with each other if planted too close. I space mine at least 3 feet apart, sometimes 4 feet for really vigorous indeterminate varieties. Yes, this means fewer plants per row, but each plant produces so much more that your total yield is actually higher. Another thing, staking or caging needs to be done right for deeply planted tomatoes. These plants get big and produce heavy fruit. Flimsy stakes won't cut it. I use 6-foot-tall stakes driven at least a foot into the ground, or heavy-duty tomato cages. The last thing you want is a plant loaded with fruit toppling over because you used a wimpy support system. Let's talk about fertilizing throughout the season. Deep planting gives your tomatoes a great start, but they still need nutrients as they grow. I side dress with compost once a month. Just spread a couple inches of compost in a ring around the plant. A few inches away from the stem, the nutrients leach down into the root zone with each watering. I also use a liquid organic fertilizer every 2 weeks once flowering starts. Something with a balanced NPK ratio, maybe 5-5-5 or similar. This keeps production high throughout the season. Watch your plants for signs of nutrient deficiency. Yellow lower leaves can indicate nitrogen deficiency. Purple undersides of leaves can indicate phosphorus deficiency. Blossom end rot indicates calcium deficiency. The beauty of deeply planted tomatoes is they're better at accessing nutrients, so deficiencies are less common. But they can still happen, especially in poor soil or if you're not fertilizing. Catch problems early and address them. Here's something interesting. Deeply planted tomatoes often have different pruning needs than shallow ones. They're more vigorous, so they produce more suckers, those little shoots that grow between the main stem and branches. Some people remove all suckers. Some people leave them with deeply planted tomatoes. I leave the first few suckers and remove the rest. Those first few become additional main stems that produce their own fruit. The plant's root system can support it. But if you leave every sucker, the plant becomes a jungle. Find a balance. Let me tell you what happens if you don't deep plant. You get a tomato plant with a small root system that's constantly stressed. It can't access enough water during hot weather. It can't pull enough nutrients from the soil. It's unstable in wind. The plant puts all its energy into basic survival, and fruit production suffers. You'll get tomatoes, sure, but they'll be smaller, less abundant, and the plant will peter out earlier in the season. It's the difference between a marathon runner and someone who's barely getting by. Compare that to a deeply planted tomato. Tons of resources, stable and strong, producing abundantly all season. The plant is thriving, not surviving. That's the difference. It costs you nothing extra. No special equipment, no expensive products. Just a different way of putting the plant in the ground. Same amount of effort, way better results. Here's what you need to do right now if you haven't planted your tomatoes yet. Get your seedlings. Strip the lower leaves, dig your holes or trenches deep. Add your amendments. Plant those tomatoes way deeper than feels right. Water them in. Mulch around them. Then stand back and watch what happens. In a few weeks you'll see the difference. In a few months, when you're harvesting buckets of huge, beautiful tomatoes, you'll wonder why you ever planted them any other way. And if you've already planted your tomatoes the regular way this season, don't worry. You can still help them out. Mulch heavily to keep the roots cool and moist. Fertilize regularly. Water deeply but infrequently. And next year, plant them deep from the start. One more thing before we wrap up. People always ask if this works for other plants. Can you deep plant peppers? Eggplants? Anything else? Short answer is no. Not really. Peppers and eggplants don't form roots from their stems like tomatoes do. If you bury a pepper stem, it just sits there and might rot. Tomatoes, and their close relatives like tomatillos, are special. They've got this superpower, and we should use it. There are a few other plants that can form roots from stems. Some herbs like basil will do it in water. Potatoes obviously do it. That's how you get more potatoes. But for garden vegetables, tomatoes are the stars. They're practically begging to be planted deep. They've evolved this ability. and we'd be fools not to take advantage of it. So there you have it. The secret to bigger fruits and more tomatoes every single time. Deep planting. It's not complicated. It's not expensive. It's just different from what most people do. And that difference makes all the difference in your harvest. Try it this season. Compare a deeply planted tomato to a regularly planted one. See for yourself. I guarantee you'll never go back to shallow planting again. If this helped you out, hit that subscribe button. I've got more gardening videos coming that'll change how you grow everything. Thanks for watching, and happy gardening.